I don't have any communications from downstairs because there weren't any. I see absolutely no public to comment. So I'm going to ask if any of the committee members have comments, and Mr. Passios.
Attended the last Capital Planning Committee meeting, and John may have some information about the meeting itself, but I actually had a chance to have a short conversation with the fire chief about how their budget's going presently and what their challenges are, and he said their biggest challenge, as always, is repair costs, and for a number of different reasons, including that fire trucks that used to last 30 years are not lasting that long anymore. The old adage of they don't make them like they used to is showing up very strongly in the needs for repairs of the fleet that they have presently.
The only thing I would add is that similarly, we had a little talk with the police chief about the interactions that they're having more routinely with when they stop somebody, and those interactions have sometimes been violent enough to affect the actual vehicles, the squad cars, and that he's been having to he and his department have been having to do some repair on the inside of the cars. So there's that as well. Yeah.
Mr. Beardbone.
I watched the town meeting tape yesterday, having been unable to attend on Tuesday night. And one of the issues that I started thinking about in watching the meeting came out of the Butterfly Lane discussion. And it occurred to me that I personally, and I'm curious as to if other members of the board have the same feeling, that I personally really don't understand what's going on with respect to stormwater planning. And in particular, I'm curious as to whether there has been a change in policy or a shift in policy that led to the requirements on Butterfly Lane around catch basins and the retention system. And if that will in fact lead to additional costs that we need to be aware of, either as new streets are added and or repaired in the future. It made me recall a conversation that I had with the DPW director at town meeting last year around the additional costs associated with stormwater. And I'm wondering if that's something that is just going to naturally come to us as a part of the budget season, or if that's something that we should have a conversation with the planning board about, or the stormwater task force. I don't know, being a new member to this committee, if this is something that's been wrestled with in the past. But it occurs to me that the cost of maintaining 1/3 of a mile on Butterfly Lane is substantially more than the cost of maintaining 1/4 of a mile on Brown Avenue, where I live. And I'm curious as to whether that's a trend that we need to be aware of and thinking about.
Yeah, that's a good notion. And it is true that I know that with the pavement management planning, I know that the DPW director has taken into account the whole stormwater regulations, but it would be probably good to get a sense of what those are and what the effect is, and it would be easy enough to reach out to the stormwater task force.
And I haven't had a conversation even with Jack about this, but sure. I'm not even sure where to go. If this is a stormwater task force issue, a DPW issue, a planning board issue, I'm really not sure.
Yeah, no, I think you're right on with I believe it starts with the stormwater task force, because they're going to know what the regulations are that are coming. Jack will know in terms of the implementation of it, but I think that in terms of the dollars and cents, and it could be both of them, and we could just reach out to them and see if, just reach out to the task force in general and have somebody talk about that.
Yeah, and again, this could be something that we just make part of the budget season discussion as we're getting kind of late in the calendar, but I was alarmed by the numbers that came out that Heather brought to us last week or 2 weeks ago when we were talking about Butterfly Lane, and then you know, what actually came to pass in the discussion at town meeting, you know, that I think there were issues that were not clarified until the town meeting discussion, and I
Right,
think
right.
it's something that we need to take a more holistic look at.
Right, and that, in particular, that would be when the contractor said, well, yes, I was told I have to do it that way.
Right,
So,
right.
oh, all right, well, that's, all right, then that makes a difference in terms of, so, yeah, I think that's a good point.
If I may jump in, first of all, I agree, Peter, it's a good, it's something we prudently should address more specifically. I remember when Butterfly Lane initially came before this board, one of the things we were told was that there would be some re-engineering of the intersection with Butterfly Lane and Elmwood Place, right? And that was one of the additional costs. But we didn't at that time have any idea of, I didn't leave with any idea of exactly how much that would cost.
But, yeah, good point. Okay.
Can I just add to that just a little bit? Because when it first came up, when the first warrant review came up with just Heather and us, I believe it was a workshop meeting, the cost of that came up. I very specifically brought it up. I wanted to know what it was going to cost. So we made it known that we'd be looking for that figure. Then it came back around. It was not the town meeting, but it was sometime between that meeting and the town meeting where I believe Heather had said that the cost was about $2,200 a year. And then we get to
About
the...
2,000, actually.
Okay, all right, so, oh, good, so you guys heard that. And then we get to the town meeting and they say $650. So it wasn't for lack of effort, I think, on our part to try to get those numbers.
Well, so but there are varying costs. So in the town, and I should go back and watch the tape. I only saw it yesterday, and I think I've forgotten the specifics. But there's the plowing costs. There's
Yep.
the cost of emptying these. They're not catch basins, but specialized filtering systems or whatever they are.
Yep,
Yep.
And then there's also paving,
yep.
which they had put it like a 10-year replacement cost, which I hope that road will last more than 10 years. But, you know, so it wasn't $2,200 on an annualized cost, but I think if you amortize some of the costs, particularly when it comes to paving, you could easily land at that number or a greater number. In any event, I share your frustration around the forthcoming of those numbers.
Right.
But I think that the numbers that we saw at town meeting are probably the most accurate.
Yeah, I think by the time we got to town meeting, that the way that the numbers were hammered out, and I think that's the other thing that made it easier to look at, was that they itemized where the source of the costs. So, but it is definitely, I'll reach out to them and see who might be available to come talk to us about that. We don't have a town manager and finance director report because we don't have either here. So basically, folks had requested an opportunity just to review some of the information, try to synthesize some of the information from the symposium, and also it would probably be good to take a look at any of the issues that came up for people from the special town meeting as well. So I would certainly open up any comment or discussion that anybody wanted to have about any of those items.
Well, with respect to the pre-meeting before the town meeting, particularly with the schools, I was struck by how many additional positions Dr. Burnham was talking about adding to the school department, and it was for very good reasons. The behavioral issues, the instructional issues that they wanted to address in their school population. But I started to get a little bit concerned, well, not concerned because I don't have enough information to know how to evaluate this yet. But we have, as a committee, weighed in on the one additional police officer per year for the next 10 years, and the associated costs of squad cars. And I just wondered if this was going to, this wholly speculative, to what extent that was going to, that might affect that, or might affect, say, the available, the funds available for capital plan projects. So that's, again, purely speculative, but I was struck by how many positions, like 22, I think, it was 22 in the
That's
teaching
approximate
positions and 19 in administrative. And, it may not be as big a deal as I think it is, but I get a little bit concerned about that, so.
You're singing my tune. I mean, this is the point I've been trying to make for some time, coming after last year's budget discussion, and then looking at, what's ultimately needed to accomplish the strategic goals that the superintendent has been talking about. They're just, if you project out 2.5%.
Sure.
Over the course of the next 10 years, there isn't a sufficient supply of money to pay for all that.
And then the nub is that it is not like this is incidental stuff, this is extra stuff. This is, Dr. Brenner makes a very compelling case for the importance of staffing up like this.
But she did say on both the symposium and at that meeting we had here as a workshop, that it's all dependent on enrollments. And when I think about back to the symposium, looking at the different populations and where it's growing, I guess I'm not seeing the actual numbers behind substantiating that much staffing. So that's just sort of how I'm putting the information together. And, there's no question in my mind that there's going to have to be some growth in the school department, but I'm not sure that Dr. Burnham even thinks she's going to need the full 22 staff. I think she put it out there as like best case scenario in X number of years. And then the other thing is that, if I understand it correctly, she's working with the town manager on a 5-year plan, so I'm really curious to see what that is. Because we aren't privy to the conversations they're having and the strategic discussions they're having, and I really want to get some of that information to get a clearer picture about what's going on with the school budgets and how they're approaching it from that end.
Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, as do I. I heard what she said, relative to the strategic plans, and perhaps, I think she mentioned at a school committee meeting, or maybe it was here, getting my meetings jumbled, around looking at a strategic plan similar to what is in place for the public safety departments. And I'm anxious to see it as well. I'm a little skeptical, given the math, I think, is, the point that I wanted to make. But also, I'm not sure that this is as enrollment. I think that there are certain aspects of this that are absolutely as enrollment driven. And on the second page of her estimate at the symposium, I think is largely enrollment driven because they're teachers.
Yeah.
And yes, there are some programs that will probably go away and new programs that will need to come, but ultimately, teaching positions are largely driven by enrollment. The first page, on the other hand, I don't think is enrollment driven.
Right.
Right? I think some of these, data analyst positions and behavioral requirements and some of the challenges that they're dealing with around the dean of students, or what we used to call when I was a kid, vice principal positions.
Yeah.
Those are needed probably regardless of what the enrollment looks like.
Sure.
So I think that there's two sides to that coin.
Yeah, I would like to jump in. Have I stepped on your?
No, not at all, please, and I apologize if I did to you.
That's okay. With respect to the enrollment, I come down on, pretty much on Peter's interpretation that the actual numbers of students is quite secondary to the structural demands that Dr. Burnham was talking about, was presenting. And the reason it stuck in my mind is that if you go back to what is now seems like prehistory, but 2010, 2009, the school enrollments were actually higher than they are now, even projected. So I think that suggests to me that it is less a numbers thing than it is an instructional behavioral issue. And the issue with schools, in contrast to some other departments, is that it's a labor-intensive value added, as opposed to, say, fire and to a large extent DPW. So there's an additional, there's that level to deal with as well.
Yeah. There's no, I mean, don't misunderstand. I looked at the towers, the superintendent towers, and, I talked to her specifically about that, and I do agree that there is room to grow, but I think that they're working on that, and I think we need to be careful in our approach to try to work with them on trying to understand the whole issue.
Well, I think that what I'd like to do is go back to the whole discussion that we had at the last meeting where there was talk about, like trying to have a 5-year forecast, much like the town manager does, and on the night that the town manager presents the 5-year financial forecast, if there's a way to go ahead and have the schools do that at the same time. I'm trying to remember how long it took last year for the 5-year forecast. I thought it went faster than...
It went fairly quickly.
So I think it would be possible to do that. I would be reluctant to do it in different meetings, because I think there is a tendency for people to silo to their favorite departments and not get the whole picture. And to the extent that that can be arranged, that would be great. And I'm still turning that over.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so.
All right.
Yeah,
So-
you and Peter can work on that?
So do you, and there was a lot of information that was shared by the superintendent, and great conversation I think we had
Yes.
with her last week. Did you come away with the impression that she thought that she would be able to deliver a 5-year forecast with?
No.
Okay, because that was not the impression that I came away with either, but.
No, and that's why basically, however you guys put something like that together, the problem is, as you had said before, was that
Right.
we were so late in the season in terms of identifying what the cash needs were, that it might not be a bad thing to still have
Yeah.
some sense of 5-year forecast, whether
So-
you can have the dollars or not.
So here's my thinking on this, and
Okay.
it'd be great to get some feedback from you guys. And I had brought this up with the town manager when she did her presentation a month or two ago around the budget process. And the point that I tried to make was that the 5-year forecast in this process is, in my opinion, it's too closely buttressed to the annual budget process. And I don't think that it gets its fair due and consideration, because we're all hyped up around the budget and those issues and are going into the annual budget process, and we're not necessarily going through the 5-year strategic plan and the ramifications and really processing that, considering it, and considering whether there needs to be a broader dialogue around that forecast that could ultimately lead to some strategic financial decisions.
It's an interesting point.
And I guess the point that I would try to make is, since then, that conversation has developed into the work that's happening between the town manager and the superintendent of schools. And maybe what we need to look at is, do we go through the process in January and have the discussion with the town manager around the 5-year forecast, but then together with the school committee say, maybe we need to look at this more strategically for the next fiscal year or later in the calendar year, and say, what can we do to encourage this to happen in a more coordinated fashion between the town manager and the superintendent? The discussion that we led to is, last week is, okay, if there were ever a need, if we ever got to a point in a budget discussion where we said, we need to have an override, right? If we ever got to that point, how would we do it? What would the timing be? What would be the scenario of events that led to that discussion, that brought that to town meeting into a ballot? And it's been so long since it's happened in Lunenburg. There aren't a lot of people that are experienced with this or know how to do it. And in my mind, we're not at, we're so far behind the 8 ball in this and having this strategic plan. I don't think we'd be ready to have that discussion, no matter how critical the budget discussion got going into this budget season, that we would be able to do that in May for a May town meeting or a May ballot. But if we had this as part of a 5-year strategic discussion at some point following that, it may become very clear to us that in the fiscal year after this, or the fiscal year after that, the numbers eventually get to a point where we need to do something. And can we have a rational, strategic discussion with the other boards and with the residents and with the members of, and with the town meeting voters that says, this is what's going to need to happen. All things being equal, let's have a good discussion and debate about this, but this is what's going to need to happen for fiscal year 21 or 22 or whatever the case might be.
I think all of those are good ideas, and I think that the one false assumption is that there is a strategic plan. So
well, the school department claims they have one.
Well, the school department may, but I think that basically the town as a whole does not, and which was one of the reasons why, okay, so we started the process with, okay, let's do a fact gathering, let's start with the symposium, and then somehow there needs to be some coordination of, if there's going to be a strategic plan that's going to be prioritizing spending, that would be a marvelous thing. And I think that is something that could easily be done outside of the budget process. I think the 5-year forecast is actually part of the budget process. That's actually by statute required.
With that timing?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, I didn't know that.
Yeah, so basically that kicks off the budget season. So everything's timed back from the town meetings until you get to that.
Right.
So, but I do believe that, yeah, it would be really great if there was some strategizing or a strategic plan from all of that basically the budget was going to address. And I've said that all, for the 9 years, however many years I've been on the committee. I don't know.
See, so we get new people to beat our heads against them.
Yeah, well, no. But I also think that there's been progress made. I mean, in terms of over time, like basically we used to have a problem with the capital plan, looking at it saying, okay, so we're looking at like 1 to 5 years at a time. So that's been expanded, so. There's, and then you understand that the capital plan somehow ties into, the individual departments might have their strategic planning or their idea of where they want to be in 5 years, but I think the town as a whole has never agreed in terms of what it is that they want to prioritize, because you've got, and again, part of that is probably looking at the numbers from the symposium. Okay, you've got kindergartners and you've got people over 70. Those are your two big. So, yeah, so people just come in with very different ideas of what's the most important thing, so.
Sure.
And in the meantime, you look at things like all of the requirements that came in with OPEB, and all of a sudden that's become, we have to account for that. And that's taken, I mean, when you look at how much money we're spending on people who no longer work for the town, that's a big hit. And a lot of it is just because they hadn't been addressed before. So it's like, so we're also not just paying for current employees, we're basically making up time, and until all of the catch-up is done, that's funding that's unavailable to us, so. And I don't know how long it's going to take for, like, I know the Worcester Retirement Board, we're doing catch-up, and I think that was supposed to take like 20 years to get us up to,
Well, it has to be incremental because the OPEB liability is so huge.
Oh, no, there was nothing incremental about it. Worcester just came in and said, you got to pay this much.
No, but I mean, it's spread over a long period of time.
Yes.
Is what led to the incremental comment. Just to interject something sort of related to this in 5-year forecast in passing, is at least one of my takeaways from Madam Bernie's presentation a week ago was how tenuous his projections were for forecasts in Lunenburg in population, is as short-term as, say, 3 years out. So, it's like, I know when I was in another iteration of my travel through life, when we were facing uncertain futures, we tended to frame it as a low in range of plausible outcomes, and that may be the best we can possibly do as a board, as a committee. Anyway, that's.
All right, so basically, I think we're still back to, or are we back to, maybe we're not back to, having the 5-year forecast and having some joint discussion around long-term goals between the town and the schools.
So you want that to be a discussion where we get together as a meeting, or are we just going to try to coordinate a 5-year forecast or a strategic plan to be on the same night as the superintendent? Like, what is my best task here?
I don't know.
Or, I mean, should I reach out to Heather and talk it through with her? How are you timing out the deliverables on the budget?
All right, let me ask this, because, and maybe this isn't a good forum to try to have a whole picture of it, but just given what you're looking for and given what I've asked you to do, I think if you guys just can get together and come up with a proposal, I think that might be better.
I'm happy to do that.
Grab a cup of
Yeah.
coffee or something.
Sounds good.
And then after I move, I'll be happy to have coffee with anybody.
All right.
Yeah, no, I think that ultimately this is something that needs to be, a proposal needs to be drummed up by a very small group of people that includes the superintendent of schools and the town manager.
Right.
Yes.
And then we come back in a couple of weeks or whatever and say, okay, this either does or doesn't meet muster. And it probably needs to be an inclusive discussion around what is the schedule for the next 5 or 6 months, right?
Yeah.
Or the schedule up to town meeting. What can we reasonably accomplish in that period of time? And then what, from a strategic standpoint, sits above and beyond that we're probably not going to be able to accomplish, but these are conversations that really need to happen.
Right, and then
And I don't believe that we're going to be able to accomplish it all before the first Saturday in May.
Right, and I think-
So let's figure out.
well, it's also,
What is-
and then there's nothing wrong with scheduling after that. And
Right.
there's nothing wrong with saying, okay, but what we want to do then is in September, we want to do this.
Right. Right, and if we can get the town manager and the superintendent and the school committee to agree to all that, I'd feel a great sense of accomplishment.
That would be a good thing.
Well, hopefully they still have good feelings from the symposium, so they won't mind playing with us again.
Maybe, you never know. You never know when I'm going to say something that's going to offend them all. So.
Well, stop that. No, I think that basically there's definitely energy to try to get some of this stuff out there and have some public discourse on it, so. So I think, yeah, so if you guys can come up with something, that would be great. And however that might look, I know it's hard doing that, not knowing what the schedule typically is, and usually what happens is, I want to say, probably in December, we have the whole list of who's presenting when, what's going on with that, and we can look to see if we have any holes in the schedule. We typically don't. And in fact, we typically schedule so that, what we did last year was we scheduled so that we always also posted an agenda for the Monday after, just to be safe, so that if we had a snow night, we were able to catch up. But that also gives us the option, if we feel like we want to get together on a Monday night, having already had a meeting.
Exactly.
We could do that.
Exactly.
So there's nothing in the rules that says we can't meet more than, more often than we're scheduled, so, so that would be fine too, if it helps us get to where we need to go. Anything else on the symposium or on the special town meeting that anybody wanted to go over? No, okay.
Relative to the special town meeting, and I know that this is a little bit outside of the purview of the finance committee per se, but I was personally really disappointed in the outcome of the land use, the fill-in removal article. I think that it was mischaracterized by some of the people that spoke on it. I think that there was a good learning experience, certainly for the land use director and for the planning board. But I think it's unfortunate when our committees and our professionals go through so much time and effort to put something together, and it's dismissed out of hand by some of the townspeople. And I just personally, and by the way, I think that this is something that's in the financial best interest of the town for one reason and one reason only. This is a fairly large industry in Lunenburg. Keating's is, if not our number one, probably pretty high on our list of taxpayers. And it's largely been an unregulated, uncontrolled space in our town for a long time. And I think that there could be opportunity that comes with regulation and oversight and planning in this space, but we need to do it. And these guys put in a lot of effort, and I would encourage them to bring it back with some of the lessons learned, and let's get a handle on this issue, because it really has not been controlled well over the course of the last couple of decades, in my opinion.
Anything else?
Well, that touches on something that this is really peripheral, but to the general discussion, but touches on a couple issues that I was thinking about in the wake of Tuesday's town meeting. That is that sometimes I think it would be valuable, I know it would be valuable for the Finance Committee to include a little message along with with us either recommending approval or not approval or staying mute, and that is recommending approval because, or disapproval because, just to give people out there in the town meeting a little more guidance and a little more visibility into our into our the result of our deliberations. So I think that's a step that I believe would be prudent, not all the time, but sometimes to do. So I'd like to put that out there just for the committee.
I think it's a great idea.
No, I think, and actually, we had started to do that a couple of years ago,
Yeah.
and then we stopped.
Yep.
And I think it was just for no good reason.
Yeah.
Well, I think one of the discussions that we've had here over the course of the last several weeks is what is the threshold to financial impact?
Yes.
Which we don't have a hard answer on that, right? And maybe there's a policy answer that we can come up with on it, maybe not. I don't really have a strong opinion on it, but where the committee feels like there is not necessarily sufficient financial impact to make a recommendation as a finance committee, but as a group of 6 pretty well-informed Lunenburg citizens who keep a pretty close eye on the books relative to the rest of the population, we think this is a good idea or a bad idea,
Sure.
And is there room for compromise? Is there a middle ground that we can, that we can do that? I don't know the answer to that question, and I'm sensitive to those who think we might be stepping outside of our bounds, but
I don't know the answer to that question either. I've been musing about that question for the last 36 hours, off and on. And I think that's one of those things that there's no routine formula that it has to be, say, over $1,000, or it has to affect the average taxpayer of the town by X number of dollars. Rather, I think that it's very situational. It depends on issues relating to, say, is this a recurring expense? is this a small expense that leads over time to a larger expense? That sort of stuff. We just have, all that stuff we have to take into account. Where I am right now is, maybe what we want to do is just to set up a rough set of guidelines, not a specific formula, but a rough set of, a checklist, as it were, and see if in fact this particular article meets that checklist where we need to, as a committee, weigh in, and this does not. Part of this is my experience going to town meetings before I was involved in the town at this level, was that I would take a great deal of guidance from the FinCom recommendation. And sitting on the FinCom, I realized that, yeah, we're fairly smart people, we're fairly involved, and we're trying our best to do the right thing, but we have what I would call highfalutin terms an epistemological issue. That is, we know we do not have all the information. So every one of our recommendations is attenuated somewhat by that. So I think we have to be very scrupulous when we just don't have the information.
I also think that one of the issues is when we have to defer because we don't have the information.
Yes.
It's impossible to deliberate, so it's impossible without doing the roll call and allowing people to comment as they vote.
Yeah.
That's the only way to get out there, whether or not, like how you might feel on a particular, or where a decision is coming from, because we don't have the opportunity to deliberate.
But if that's what it takes, that's what it takes.
And I think that to some extent we did that a little bit, like with basically, if you have a comment or if you want to, and I think the other time that it was hard was, trying to get a sense from you guys before we had to do a roll call. Do you see a financial impact here? Or like when we would defer and say, okay, well, we're looking for a financial impact. We couldn't find one. There's no presentation. So, okay. So I'm not sure now what to say, so.
If in fact we structure a committee-wide checklist, though, I might have my own interpretation of the checklist, but I'd be able to give you my sense of whether or not, in my mind, there's a financial effect.
Okay.
I mean, there's different graduations, or there's a spectrum of effect and impact that a town meeting decision will have on the financial health of the town, right?
Yep.
So, for example, the removal and fill article. I think we would all spin our heads trying to figure out what effect that would ever have on an annual budget this year or next year or the year after, right? But I'm sure I could spin up a very strong argument that transparent and clear regulation of our fill and removal program in Lunenburg could ultimately lead to greater clarity when it comes to development, greater clarity when a potential investor is looking at buying or expanding a Keating operation or working with Powell's or what have you. A good responsible regulation is ultimately going to be something that will foster a stronger sector in those trades in Lunenburg, in my opinion.
Right.
But I could never put a dollar value on that, right?
But I also think that the other piece that was missing from that was that there was nobody from the planning board presenting.
Oh, a whole other
There
story.
was no vote.
Very good point.
There was no vote.
Very good point.
And I think that if they had voted a recommendation, then.
Yeah, and I'm a little mystified as to how that happened, but and that could have, maybe that could have tipped the scales in that case. But the point that I was getting to is, I do think that there's perhaps a spectrum of comment or recommendation, as John was alluding to, that says no financial impact, but probably a good thing for the town's for the town's commercial development or what have you, right? And
absolutely.
you leave it at that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that was also why when they got to the like the town meeting schedule, and it was just the schedule of the warrant, it was like, we don't think there's financial impact, but we do think it's a good idea.
Right.
So, but then there was no vote on it. We just think it's a good idea.
And that formulation is wonderful because by flagging that there's no direct financial effect, then we say to the assembled town meeting that, you know, take this for what it's worth, you know?
Right.
Be guided, not by our financial weigh-in, but by our individual sentiment, or not.
Yeah, and the other thing that I think is probably worth communicating with some level of discipline to the voters at town meeting is, we held a hearing. We adequately covered this article, or we did not,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
In the case of the land use, of the fill and removal,
Yeah.
Adam came and spoke with us. We had a good conversation about it. You know, we, in my opinion, adequately considered that article. Some other ones, we didn't, because we didn't have the information, Butterfly Lane being probably
Yeah,
a good example, right?
Well, the better is probably the sewer service.
Better, yes.
Yes.
Very good point. So, you know, in that case, I think that there should be some way of communicating that, no, we actually did give this quite a bit of time and attention, you know, and we are reasonably well-informed on it, or we're not, because the petitioners didn't bring us the information.
Well, I mean, are people giving feedback? I apologize.
No.
Are people giving feedback that they need information from us? And I just say, because the select board doesn't, I'm not aware of them publicizing their votes, so I'm just curious whether people are looking for us to express opinions, and then if we're voting that something has no financial effect, then I don't know if it's appropriate to put our opinions in there, our personal opinions as a non-committee vote.
Okay, well, this is how I feel about this, and then basically, because I think we can probably beat this horse dead enough to skeletal remains, but I think a checklist would be good. And I think a discussion at the time that a warrant article comes before us would be good. And I think that a note to say that while we found no direct financial impact, we felt thus and so, if indeed we felt that way, would be appropriate. If we, at the time of discussing the warrant article, said, yeah, I don't think we need to have any further comment, or that we should have further comment, then that's fine. So I think that, but I believe that the idea of the checklist is good, and I believe that the idea of, and I also would find it helpful to have that. Well, actually, whoever is the chair at the next meeting would find that, well, actually, I'll probably still be it for the town, for the regular town meeting. But it would be helpful to have that in front of me, so that when I am expressing, I'm confident that I'm expressing the view of the committee. Because I will say things like, you know, even with the Flat Hill, that we find no direct financial impact because it doesn't affect like restaurant sales, or, you know, like it's not the same type of source of income. So, you know, and I can say that, and that's why we find no direct financial impact. But on the other hand, it would be helpful to know that I'm not just reporting out my take on what we discussed.
There's a clear phrasing or something like that to the.
Yeah. So it's like, you know, because to some extent, I try to put more information out, but I will only do that if I'm confident that I'm representing the view of the committee.
Yep.
So if we do go through the checklist process as we go through the warrant articles, and if people feel like it's appropriate and it would be a good thing to expound on that, that's fine. I don't have a problem with that. But anyway, I didn't mean to cut that short, but
No.
I also just felt like we were all saying the
That's
same
a
thing.
great discussion. No, I think it's.
Yeah.
I have a next step suggestion, that is that rather than, this has been a good introductory discussion, but it's been largely, we haven't had anything specific to critique. What I'd like to do is I'd like to volunteer to put together something, just so that we can have something to pick over to guide another discussion, because I don't think we've run this to ground yet.
Okay.
And I don't know when you all want to do that, but
How about next meeting?
how about okay?
Well, our next meeting will probably be December 5th.
Yes.
which I will not be able to attend.
Well, then we'll do it on the 12th.
The meeting after that, yeah.
Yeah,
you're-
the-
I'd like to
December
be-
12th
I'd like to
is
be
a-
part of that
yeah.
discussion.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yep.
And I didn't know, would it be, I reckon it would be better were I to circulate this to you all.
Yes,
So let me do that.
thank you.
Right.
Thank you, John.
Okay.
Good discussion. I appreciate your willingness to humor me on some of these issues.
No, actually,
No,
I
this
do
is
have to
just-
say, no, we have, I mean, we've brought it up in the past, and then basically it just kind of gets lost in the process of getting to town meeting. It would help if we would have a special town meeting with maybe 3 things. That would be nice.
Maybe we should do them monthly.
Well,
I couldn't get the, like, charter
Kidding, it was a
review,
joke. It was a joke.
couldn't get the charter review committee to agree to a second
Joke.
annual, or not a second annual, but a second
Yeah.
town meeting. Okay. Was there anything else? I don't think so. All right, so basically, under the open items, we do still have goals, definitions, and committees. And I know that as we're coming around to the budget process, one of the things that did come up was the notion of defining what we're looking at or looking for from department heads in terms of service levels in particular, and there hasn't been anything from the committee, and the Board of Selectmen has not.
No, I haven't heard anything. My understanding of that goal was that it was to define terms that have been used around the budget process, but haven't had a clear, concrete definition behind them. I think level service, level funding, and there was a third term that I just can't remember. Understanding what the differences are between those and how they're used in talking about the budget process, if I'm remembering the goal correctly. And I think it's Heather's language around discussing the budget, where these terms are coming from. Especially, I think what she said, level budget, and when I asked about that, it's the same budget from last year, and then they have to ask for more money. So is that what level budget means? It's literally, they're just rolling the budget forward? Like that, I think that's what we're looking for definitions
Yep.
on.
That's exactly it, and I think we need a specific meeting with the town manager to clarify what terms she wants to use, rather than us tell her what we want to hear, I think,
and what they mean.
and what they mean. Because I share your
Yep.
confusion
Yep.
with some of the terminology that she's using in the process around, salaries and other lines and those kinds of things, and what's level and what's not. I just don't get it.
Right.
Okay.
Most commonly used by the town manager is target budget.
Yeah, again, it's
Yeah.
It's the budget that she's suggested to her department
Right.
heads, is basically what that boils down to.
Yep.
Okay.
And that's somewhere in between all of those.
right, probably, yeah, right. It's the one in the middle.
And I have to, yeah, and I want to say that Carrie Spidell used the same, or LaFleur used the same language, that there was a target budget that she gave departments to work with. So I think that basically Heather coming in stayed with the same budget format. So it's been something that the department heads have been used to for years, but yes, it would be good to review a lot of that. So, yeah, I'll ask Heather to speak to that. Anything more on those types of, yeah, and actually, it actually just reminded me of what I did want to say about the, one issue that I had from the special town meeting was actually the change in the warrant language on the positions and I didn't know until 2 days before, or whenever she sent the slides out. Was that day? It might have even been that day.
Yeah.
Steps have changed.
That the grade assignments had been changed.
Why, so that was not clear from the YouTube video
Right.
what happened
What happened
there, so-
was that the Personnel Subcommittee met last week and changed a couple of their recommendations. So when the warrant article was presented, it was presented with the changes rather than what was initially proposed.
In the warrant.
Right. So, and that was, but the other thing that just kind of triggered me a little bit was, why do we have hourly rates that are below minimum wage? That is a mystery to me.
So it did come up in the public hearing, and I just recently reviewed this because I was doing the minutes, that one of us had asked the question of the town manager about that issue, and it was specific around the lifeguard position. Because the purpose of moving the lifeguard position to 4 was that it put it above that minimum wage threshold, and 1, 2, and 3 were for some reason below minimum wage. And I think that the underlying issue, having never stepped in a one of these meetings before, is that it's a major overhaul of this system to write it so that it all gets into a space where it's above minimum wage and whatever other mandates that we might have.
Right.
So what she alluded to is that there's an overhaul underway as one of their big projects, that they recognize the fact that this needs to be basically redone or recalibrated.
Right.
But it's not something that can be done in a meeting or a month. It's something that is a pretty substantial thing, because there's all kinds of contractual tentacles running from that spreadsheet you're looking at.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I again, I would just go back to just thinking is, okay, so, and I think that the response back was that, you don't have to start at step 1. Well, all right, well, black it out.
Why have it, right?
Yeah,
Right.
I mean, basically, it's okay to leave grade 3 where it is, but black out the hourly rates that you cannot use legally. I mean, that, to me, would have been an easier presentation to understand. But anyway, that was where that came from, that change had happened. And I know that when the town manager first came, when I first got to there, I what happened with that, and like what's going on. So then when it came, it was all put back, then that was fine. But that threw me a little bit. That and it's not the. Hopefully that won't happen at the annual town meeting. But anyway, all right. So in terms of the goals and definitions, the biggest one that we really wanted to work on had to do with the definitions. Was there anything else that, aside from the terms around the budget? And then the other thing that she won't be able to define is, like, when she sets her target budget, okay, in her mind, the term that she's using is level service, except that it doesn't really mean level service, it really just means level staffing. She's really looking at level staffing. And then when she writes the target budget, she's identified an increase in positions, if there are increasing positions. But when she says level service or level funding, she's looking at level staffing.
But what does that mean? Does that mean level staffing, I'm going to increase staff because I'm going to get more calls, or does that mean I'm going to keep the same staff I had before, it's staying level?
That's more the target budget piece. So and then that also goes to the schools, and that was because when the question came up about what does level service mean for schools, when you have to move different teachers around and you have different licensure requirements for different positions, and so you might have the same number of people, but they're doing different things. So it's so all of that terminology would be important to get a handle on. I'm not sure that she can speak too much to what level service means for schools, because she doesn't get into the intimacy of the budget. So it might be that we have to reach out to the schools at that point to get a sense of what does it mean to them.
Well, I think it's good to start
Yep.
with Heather and
Yep.
kind of see where we land, because
Absolutely.
I'm sufficiently confused.
Okay. Is there anything more on the definitions or goals that people wanted to speak to?
Do we care about the other goals we talked about in the original goal meeting? Anyone?
Did we prioritize them?
We didn't. Well, other than the definition one, which kind of.
Well, because that one just keeps coming up. So we addressed the free cash one, but I don't think that any of us feel like we have a really good grip on free cash nonetheless.
So we also want more on free cash.
It might be helpful if the presentation looked at last year and said, these are all the numbers we put together from last year that came up with this free cash figure. Like concrete numbers, the underspend on this budget, or like that whole, however, like the calculation of it, because I don't think the presentation I think we got too abstract of a presentation. I don't think any of us can back into the budget and figure out the free cash, and I think the thinking is we should be able to do that.
Well, the other thing that we can do is, instead of picking on Heather to do it, we could pick on Karen to do it, and
Yeah.
have her actually come in with the figures.
So-
And I'd like to go back farther. I'd like to do a multi-year look back over the free cash figures and where they came from, because at some point, something changed in the way the capital plan was funded, that changed the timing of when we recognized free cash.
Yeah.
So that it was now available for the next year budget. And that seemed to change the funding that was available. And so because of the way it changed that, then all of a sudden, we were having bigger numbers, and we didn't expect that. And I think the other thing is, it would be interesting to see, if everything was spent, what would we anticipate for free cash to come available for free cash?
Yeah, I had a conversation with the town manager a day or two following that presentation. I came to her office and just had a few one-on-one questions, and I actually point blank asked her the question, are we doing something different that is causing us to have more free cash today than what we were doing 8 or 10 years ago? And her answer was, well, I wasn't here 8 or 10 years ago, but no, that the reason for the fluctuation and the general greater numbers in free cash are more circumstantial because of tax lien or because of, some specific issue that has come around on any given year that has caused that number to be what it is. And, she gave me what I think was a definitive, direct answer, and I kind of accepted it as that, but I think it's probably worth a look back and saying, okay, well, what actually were those circumstances, and so that we can kind of get a flavor for, if they come around again, what are the potential numbers associated with that. What I think I'm missing, at least in my 6-ish months now on this board, is free cash is a function of spending. And I don't feel like I have any visibility of spending. So how would we ever know or have visibility into what constitutes free cash before, say, July 15th after the books are closed, unless we're getting some sort of regular view into what's happening with different accounts, right? Dave pointed out to me on his spreadsheet that he shared, there's a big give back number around one of the facilities numbers. Well, why is that, right? Well, maybe Heather has visibility of that, but we don't. And should we? I don't know what the answer to that is, but we're never going to know what the free cash number is until somebody tells us what the spending is.
Right, and I think that actually that's, all right, so this is actually, more a Karen question, that basically there's no reason why when she presents the quarterly report for the Board of Selectmen and the Finance Committee, that we don't get the backup. So we could just ask her for the backup, and she'll give us the backup. I mean, that's, and then we can just review that.
I mean, I hate to make a comparison to, the world that I live in P&L, but, in my department, we have monthly meetings with our budget controllers, and we're told when we're underspending. And the reason for that is that not spending what we projected has all kinds of ramifications for the broader budget and what we're telling our senior executives and so on and so forth. So we keep a very close eye, particularly if we get above what we're supposed to be spending, but even below is a pretty big deal. And my hope would be that we're running our departments in a similar fashion. I don't want them to spend unnecessarily, but where there's an underspend, perhaps there are better uses for that money than sitting in an account doing nothing until it's literally more than a year in most cases, right? If we are not spending money in Q2 of this fiscal year, that money is not going to be reappropriated in reality until a year and a half later at the next annual town meeting when we allocate it to a capital plan.
And
Why in the world are we doing that?
Right, and what opportunities did you miss by not using that money when it was allocated?
Exactly.
For the fiscal year it was allocated.
Okay. All right, other goals?
The one that I keep harping on is the non-municipal funding, getting that list. And I know Heather had said she was making it part of the budget process, but I'm hoping that we'll have a more direct line to that information. Whether she's compiling it, do we need to ask at presentations? Should I reach out to the department heads directly? You know what I'm saying? But, because I think it's a worthy endeavor to have that figure. If this board is concerned about spending $2,000 a year on Butterfly Lane, then we should better be concerned about possibly spending $13,000 more on the library and, $10,000 more on the Council on Aging and, so I think it's a worthy endeavor to get those numbers together.
You're talking about funding, though. You're talking about dollars coming in from outside municipal sources. Like,
Yeah.
for example, when we had the Council on Aging director here last week, and she talked about her grant money that is a function of population,
Yep.
and she has to reapply for that money every year, but that's subject to legislative appropriation.
Right.
So if they decide to underfund that, good golly, so sorry, you're underfunded.
Right, and this is exactly why I've been asking since the last budget season to get these numbers put together. So, like the library last year, I believe $13,000 of operating expenses were paid by the Friends of the Library. That's a big chunk of change. So, yeah, so I hope that's being taken seriously. I know I brought it up a lot. I even made a remark last time, so I don't know how I can be more directly involved to make sure we get that all in one spot. I'm open to suggestions on that.
That conflicts, the Friends of the Library conflicts with my understanding where the $13,000 figure is correct, I'm sure, but what they do specifically is to use that to fund non-operating expenses like the museum passes. They're not,
okay.
in fact, they're explicit, and there's a little bit of a conflict here that my wife is the treasurer
Yeah.
of that. So, I'm getting it from her, and there is an explicit use of that fund that is not with the ongoing operating expenses.
Oh, then I must have misread. I thought I read in the
No,
slides
I
that.
read it too. I read something to the effect of, and this just needs clarification, because I'm purely speculating, but my interpretation anyway is that there are some things that are, spending that is, they can, the Board of Trustees can decide whether or not it should be included in the budget, but as a matter of spending, it has to flow through the municipal spending.
Okay,
So,
that's a little-
so it needs to be accounted for accordingly, right?
Yeah.
Like, it can't be, the Friends of the Library go out and buy, an antique book collection or something.
Yeah,
And,
no.
there are certain things that need to flow through the municipal
Yeah.
budget. That was my interpretation of it, but
I will try to
It could be-
track that down.
Yeah.
I do know that there's one area that's a little bit fuzzy for me, that is the Friends of the Library funds the copying machine there. And that's a.
But that's a revolving fund,
That's a
right?
revolving fund, and that's it. But that, again, that's, arguably operation, they do make copies, but I don't know how much that overlaps.
One of the things in my professional life that I get involved in talking to risk and security executives in major corporations is this whole concept of dashboarding, where, you know, an executive will say, I have 15 numbers that I'm responsible for. And some of those numbers can be updated every day. Some of those numbers can be updated every week. Some of them are just quarterly, and some of them I never know. But I'm still responsible for them. And what we try to build for them is a solution whereby we can bring those numbers all to a single screen and represent those in pie charts or bar graphs or trending or whatever, but just so that they can kind of see all of the numbers that affect their life in one place. And, you know, I'm almost wondering if that's a concept that we should be thinking about relative to things like non-municipal funding, spending, those kinds of things where, you know, as we're deliberating on a variety of different budget issues, we know that, you know, our free cash number is probably going to be a lot bigger next year than it is this year, so maybe this is something that we store away for spending next year, or something along those lines, right? But without that dashboarding capability, we're all subject to whatever the last conversation that we had with Heather, and that's probably not sufficient.
Yeah.
I would, I'm wondering, I know that she said this year the department heads were going to be using software that, from the company that does the website, for the financial data.
ClearGov?
Yeah. So I wonder if it might be helpful to get a look at what it is
Yeah,
that
maybe.
they're looking
That's
at,
what I
because this is
thought,
going to be
yeah.
the first year that they're using that.
Yeah, and maybe there's some capabilities that'll
There
flow
might be.
from that we could perhaps take advantage of. That's a
Yeah.
really good point.
Okay. So anyway, but, all right, so if the non-municipal funding, because, and I wonder if part of what you might also be seeing from the 13,000 is, I don't know if they record, they might not present on what the benefit of Mars, I know they have to pay a particular amount for Mars to participate in that, is it Mars?
Yeah.
So that basically, if we didn't hit certain thresholds, that we would lose access to something.
Right,
So,
right. Yeah, I can't, I know what you're talking about, yeah.
There's the circulation budget has to be a percentage of
It's a threshold.
threshold percentage of the total budget. I think 19% or something like that, but it's, and that's one of the things that CW Mars measures.
CW Mars, that's it.
thank you. Okay. But yes, it's, and I think the only other thing I could think of would be to do a, to identify for department heads what data we're looking for in advance of the, you want it all in one document. Or you want
I'll
to be able
take
to
it from
compile
each person separately and compile it. I'm more than happy to do that.
Then I think that it, you know, then at this point, if you want it now, I would say that there's no reason why you couldn't, on behalf of the board, write to the department heads and ask them any, do you want it, and I guess you would have to be careful to say, okay, do you want it to be what operational costs are covered by money that is not budgeted?
Any of their expenses, anything that they're paying for, I would want to know what's be paying, because if it's not, they must, if it's something that they're purchasing or paying for or whatnot, there must be a reason for that. So if they can no longer have the funding to pay for that, then what are they going to be losing out on? I mean, that's really what this drives at.
Okay.
So, like, I know when Sue Doherty was talking about her formula grant, that allowed her to be able to pay for kitchen staff, right? So we can draw a direct line. If she doesn't get this, then she's not going to have this staff. So it's sort of being able to make those connections with it as well. And that's why I say for the library, and it's in the slides, John, I guess I'm just misremembering the slides, but, you know, just getting an understanding of
So
what.
it's not just non-municipal funding then, it's also what that funding is earmarked for.
Well,
There's both sides, there's the funding and there's the spending, right? And so,
Yeah.
for example, if the funding formula, if the formula grant does not come through as expected,
Yeah.
then we're either not going to pay the kitchen staff and they're going to go away, or we're going to need to pay the kitchen staff from some other
Right.
funding source.
Right.
I mean, that's-
So for me, the priority is to get the numbers. What money is coming in that's not municipal, it's non-municipal funding? And then it would be nice to be able to draw the line from that funding to exactly what it is funding, so we would know what we would be, what's tangible, what will specifically be missing funding for.
Then I think that basically you should ask it that way, so that you have both pieces, so that basically the department head is, okay, so if this is, I get this money from here, if I didn't have this money, I wouldn't have this.
Exactly.
And I think that if it's as simple as that, then that would be helpful. Because I think that the
Friends of the Library?
Friends of the Library, it would be, all right, well, the library could still function if we didn't get this portion from the Friends of the Library,
Yeah.
because all it would mean would be we couldn't get discounts to something.
Well, yep. Actually, the one I'm most familiar with is that the Friends of the Library does these museum passes. And it's a little bit, it's actually a self-contained little subset of library patrons, in that in order to qualify to get a museum pass from the library, you have to be a member, So it's basically, it's like, for $10 you get a free pass to whatever museum. And the actual transaction to get the pass is at the library. So it does require somebody from the library to hand the pass over to whomever it is. With respect to the Friends of the Library, they have a meeting, and it's Monday. I think it's the first Monday of each month. I'll let you know when the next one is. And you may want to go talk to, Lydia will be there, and Jean Raboyne will be there, and those are the two people you would want to clarify with.
Okay.
So get rid of the middleman and talk to the real people.
And then the other, Muir is planning on coming on the 12th,
Is it?
December 12th.
Okay.
Yeah, right now, Muir and the police chief are scheduled for December 12th.
Yeah.
I don't have anybody's, I don't know if I offered the 5th, so I basically, I need to reach back out again to Chief Sullivan and Jack Robertson, so. But anyway, okay, so, but that's, yeah, and I think that would be fine, and I think that would be good to report back on.
All right.
And thank you for taking that on. What else?
So one is John's. I don't know if you're working on it at all, the 5-year. You had suggested developing essentially a 5-year forecast that, in my thinking, was a hands-on forecast. So when you got information or you made a decision, you could plug it into that and it would calculate out for you the impact.
Okay, sure, yeah. So I'll, say the next few days, I'll get it to you.
Oh, no, that's not what I was getting at.
Okay.
No, but if that's a goal, I don't know if it's something that you're still interested in doing, or?
I am still interested in doing, I haven't done a thing about it, but I'm interested in it.
All right. And then the last one is that framework to analyze the financial impact of new staff positions. I've started doing research on it. I don't have anything concrete yet on that, but it's still something that I'm thinking about. And that's it. Those are the list of goals that we had gone over.
Okay.
So somewhat related to the financial impact of new staff positions, this came up in the, you made a comment at town meeting, referencing our conversation, I think that we had last week, about the collective bargaining discussion. And it's not necessarily a new position, but maybe it's something that we could think about as part of the same discussion. Maybe not. So as I articulated last week, I've got just some uneasiness associated with the way the police contract kind of came around this year. If for no other reason than the town manager operating as an agent of the Board of Selectmen in the case of collective bargaining, the Board of Selectmen is entering into a contract with a union that is obligating the town to spend money for a period of time that sits outside of the bounds of any financial commitment that the town has made by way of town meeting and budgeting. And my thinking on this is just normal checks and balances. There ought to be an agent of town meeting that says this is copacetic or this is not copacetic. And right now in our structure in town government, we don't have that. We have a 5-member Board of Selectmen. They're duly elected. We give them that authority. In the past, the only oversight that's occurred in the case of a new contract is when it affects the budget line of that particular department, a special town meeting or a town meeting would vote on it and allocate those funds within the given year that the contract is approved. Dave and I had a sidebar conversation about this after last week's meeting, and he suggested I go and do some research. I've begun the process and asked the questions, but don't have answers. But I just personally think that that's something that we should put some thought to. My inclination is that, number one, we're completely legal doing what we're doing right now. But if it's something that we wanted to address, and I certainly don't know the opinion of this board, let alone the town as a whole on this, it probably is a charter thing. It's probably something that the charter would need to address. And as I said last week, in the case of the police contract, it was a perfectly good contract and I would have voted for it. But what happens when that's not the case? And do we have sufficient oversight so that, for example, you know, we make a contract that's a 0% in the current year, but 6 or 10% in the year following, and obligating the town to, you know, allocation of resources that nobody else outside of the 5 members of the Board of Selectmen have signed off on. And so anyway, this is just something that I've been thinking about. I've started some initial research on. I don't know that it's anything anybody wants to comment on at this time. You're certainly welcome to. But I wouldn't set it even as a goal, but I just wanted everybody to know that you know, it's kind of along those similar lines around.
Well, it certainly came up, right, when I was looking at different things that you check off the list of questions asked, unions definitely came up.
Yeah.
Yeah, without a doubt, without a doubt.
I mean, the other part of that is going to make that like an interesting discussion is that what I wouldn't want to do is get involved in departmental or contracts on one side of the coin and know that and I'm not sure if it's by charter or statute, I believe it's legally, that the school committee does the bargaining for, and there's not even, you know, chatting between the Board of Selectmen and the school committee about how that's going to go.
Right.
And how one contract might affect, you know.
Above and beyond the two of us on this committee, though, there's a high frustration of that issue also in the town. I hear it all the time out on the street, that they feel there's no empowerment of town meeting to rein in something if town meeting doesn't feel it's appropriate. I mean, the only thing you can do with the town budget, with the school budget, is remove whatever you think was the inappropriate increase for that contract, but it doesn't necessarily come away from that contract. It can come away from anything within the school
Right,
budget.
and in fact, it won't come away from the contract
Right,
because
exactly.
it's contracted.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, but you know, I think that the one difference here is that, number one, the school committee is elected for the specific purpose of the performance of the school department, and they're responsible for the totality of that. The statutory makeup of the Board of Selectmen and how that's further driven by our charter is different. There's the rules are a little bit different in terms of how we do that, and the role of the town manager versus the role of the superintendent is statutorily different. And I think that there are certain things in the school department that we can't touch as a town because of state legislation, whereas we have a little bit more breadth and oversight opportunity, should we choose to take it, within the other departments of the town, because the statutes are not as prescriptive.
Okay. Anything else on goals, definitions? No? It's probably enough for now. It's a lot of, you guys are doing a lot of work, and that's good, and I'm just going to see how long I can get away with not doing anything. Committees. Has anybody have any committee reports? Dave?
Yep. Last evening, I think we had a third meeting of the TC Passios Building Design Committee. We have committed a schedule to have an RFQ prepared and out for viewing by the first of the year to solicit architects that will come in after the first of the year to be interviewed, and that will be the first step in the process to actually select an architect to work with on the final design that would be brought to town meeting. We're fairly certain or positive at this point that there will not be a complete proposal available for an annual town meeting in May. We're kicking around the special town meeting in November, assuming there is one, but even that might be too tight a schedule for what we are discussing now, and that is that the design that's presently in place, that, as we described it last night, the nickel design for the project needs to be reworked. We hope to bring all of the parties involved in wanting space in the building back in to really fine-tune what they really need versus what they've said they need. So there's going to be a lot of work ahead after we get started with an architect. And we set down a fairly long list of criteria that will be worked into the RFQ. And that will be reviewed, at least the first draft of the RFQ will be reviewed in our first meeting in December, which will be the first Wednesday in December, and that has been moved from the second because of running into the holidays as we go into December.
Well, that will conflict with the school committee meeting then?
Yes, it will. We're aware of that.
Other committees?
School committee met last Wednesday. There was a pretty long discussion about the budget process that actually stemmed out of the symposium discussion, and in particular, Mr. Rogers' comments around dialogue and feedback and public involvement. And, you know, I think that the school committee, based on the discussion that happened here last week, is taking that to heart. And I think that, you know, the further discussion that happened a couple of days later with us, with the superintendent, you know, I'm looking forward to seeing what happens with that schedule and how the process unfolds.
John?
Okay, Capital Planning met a week ago, last Tuesday, so that would be the 5th, and we, at that meeting, met with the fire department and police departments, and basically have pretty much reviewed the police segment, which is every 3 other police officers they hire, and this 1 officer per year requires a new car, so there's a squad car, and so the town is executing to that. The last year was the big year for a fire. We got an engine, the replacement of engine number 1, I think, and that the only issue there is that it's taken some time for the actual acquisition of the engine to take place, but that's in process right now. A week from, let's see, the 19th, we will be meeting with the schools on their capital plan, and then either the week after that or the week after that, we will be meeting with the DPW. So by the fourth meeting, we will have met with, third meeting, we will have met with all of the departments with the major capital plans.
Do you know if this issue came up earlier today around the lifespan of a fire truck?
Yes.
Is that a known and measured phenomenon at this point, or is that sort of an ad hoc observation that's being made locally?
So as far as I can see, it's ad hoc. Nobody said, gee, this is what's happening. It's just that it appears to be happening. So
Because these are
These are
big money
huge
purchases.
money.
They're not meeting their lifespan. It's something that, yeah.
And they should be lasting 25 or 30 years. In fact, that's the way it works, you know, so, you know.
I think the problem that the chief has mentioned is that the frames are failing much earlier than frames in the past. Pumps are a big
Yeah,
problem.
yeah.
The pumps, and they're expensive to repair and/or replace in an existing truck. And that's where he has made the comment, especially about pumps. They are not lasting as long as they used to without major repair.
Well, at least the frames should start to last longer now that the pavement management plan is in place. So hopefully that helped. Any other committee, department?
No.
Okay. I don't think I have any. I don't. Then with that, we're back to public comment. Oh, no, we're not. You know what?
Minutes.
I didn't put minutes on the agenda, but we'll go, I think we can go ahead and do minutes anyway.
Anybody want copies?
I do just want to ask whether or not, and it wasn't in the body of the minutes, if you had any feedback on any of them, because I think on the first set, your next meetings included the symposium in August.
Oh, did it?
Yeah, that's,
But
Yeah,
that's easy enough to just cross out,
Yeah.
and,
I can go back and fix it, too.
and,
These are obviously, there's a lot of cutting and pasting going on.
Oh, I think that long.
Yeah, it's the wrong date. Oh, no, yeah, it's the wrong date. I put August instead of
yeah.
October. Okay.
So, but other than that,
and this is almost surpassingly niggling in that, in addition to that, the bylaws in your minutes are B-I-L-A-W, and it should be B-Y-L-A-W.
Okay.
That's,
Is that a repeated thing or one place, do you know?
I noticed it twice.
Okay.
So, but I
Could be my
didn't
spell
scour the
checker.
minutes besides that. Just in general, after having done this really petty correction, I just wanted to salute Peter. I thought the minutes were exceedingly well done. They helped me enormously when minutes are that detailed. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you for the compliment.
And
and with that, you'll make a motion.
I'll make a motion to accept them. Of course, as edited.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. I'm sorry, when you said date,
Aye.
you meant for me to say October 10th.
There's two sets in there, October
Yeah.
and,
Yes, for
Yeah, so
both.
the October 10th,
24th.
There's the 10th and the 24th.
right, and I didn't include the set of minutes from the 24th, so I should now ask for a motion to approve the minutes from October 24th.
I never got around to looking at them, I'm
Okay.
sorry.
Well, we can wait.
Yeah, I didn't vote because I didn't read them. No.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I intend to read them, but I just wasn't able to get to that
All
today.
right, we
All
can
right,
wait.
and then basically, all I want to say about if you do minutes from the symposium,
I'm not intending to, but
you'll have to because we did convene, but all you have to say in the minutes is that we called the meeting to order we heard the presentations, and we adjourned.
okay. All right,
And then the presentations, I believe the slides are available online.
okay.
We don't even have to reference that. Basically, I wasn't even going to post a meeting.
Yeah, no, I recall the conversation.
Yeah, but because I ended up posting it, because I did at the symposium say.
All right, I will do that and circulate, and we also have last week that I've not done yet, so
And that's-
that's 2 meetings. The other thing that I would call attention to is that, assuming that we meet on the 5th, I will not be able to participate in that meeting.
Right.
Electronic, I'm going to be on a plane. So, do we know if that meeting will be televised or recorded?
I'm not even sure there'll be a
It's
meeting.
off cycle? Okay.
I don't even know if there's a meeting, because basically the only reason why we would have a meeting would be if we had somebody who wanted to come and have a
Okay.
chat. If, depending on the nature of the meeting and who might be available, we might look to see if we could get it recorded. Because if it, like, if I reach out and Stormwater's available, somebody from Stormwater's available, or if Chief Sullivan, or, so, we'll see.
My ask would be, if it's not recorded, if we could
That
just
somebody
decide
else has to take
something.
minutes.
I routinely issue probably no note stuff. It's a mnemonic that I need, so I'll be virtual, make virtual a necessity.
Okay, thank you.
So there is a possible meeting on December 5th as the next meeting. December 12th, it's a regularly scheduled meeting. We will begin at 6:30 on that night. Again, I've heard from Muir and Chief Marino for presentations, or for conversations that night. So we'll proceed with that. And if I can schedule anybody for December 5th, I will certainly do that. And with that, unless there's anything that anybody on the committee has, I'll be happy to accept a motion to adjourn.
So moved?
Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, then.
Rich,
It sounds like,
Whoever's picking it, no,
most
this is-
everybody is in favor, all in favor.
All of it, aye.
Okay, the meeting is adjourned at 8:30.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I did talk to some legislative.
That's great.
I don't want to run you over, Jay.
Or,